Hi, welcome back everyone to CJ 213. Today we are covering Chapter 10, Parole and Release to the Community. One of the chapters that directly connects what happens behind bars with what happens after release. I've seen this transition play out hundreds of times. Men walked out with hope, a plan, a right mindset. Others walked out already defeated with no intention of changing and no support from the outside. Parole is supposed to be the bridge between those two worlds, the structured, rigid world of incarceration, and the unpredictable, often chaotic world of reentry. But as you'll see today, that bridge is fragile. It's imperfect and heavily dependent on human behavior. So, some parole practices. Modern parole practices come from several early correction reform systems. Uh, the ticket of leave, which was Maconochie, believed that people could earn their way um, out through positive behavior. This was this was kind of ground shifting because it replaced pure punishment with behavior-based reward systems. And then you have the Irish mark system by Crofton. Crofton added structure, marks, phrases, and supervised relief. Prisons weren't just holding places; they became behavioral laboratories, so to speak. And then you had the Elmira Reformatory, it's Brockway. So Elmira focused on education, classification, discipline, and rewards. Brockway believed young offenders could be reshaped and not just punished. These early systems really form the DNA of modern parole. Behavior matters, progress matters, and supervision matters, and reentry planning matters. We use all of those principles daily in how we documented behavior, classified inmates, and recommended them for parole review. So today, more than 862,000 adults are in parole supervision. That was in 2020. So I haven't done a statistical analysis of recent, but I almost guarantee that that's probably close to a million now. Um, the numbers really fluctuate though because sentencing laws change. Uh, Policy shift from rehabilitation to control and back again, and prison overcrowding forces a lot of early release sometimes, and obviously budgets always affect supervision capacity. So one of the major trends though is the decline in discretionary parole. uh, from my experience, we saw guys being considered for early release. Mandatory supervision replaced discretionary judgment. Many truly dangerous individuals were released simply because their time expired, not because they were ready. So that that alone makes reentry so much more challenging. So parole rests on four principles. Parole is a privilege, not a right. Many inmates mistakenly think they're owed parole. They're not. This the state grants it when somebody shows readiness. Two, parole is a contract. You receive conditional freedom in exchange for compliance. Three, violate the contract, you go back. And I saw many go back, often for simple violations, failed drug test, missed appointment, uh, no contract order ignored, things like that. Number four, the state maintains control until parole ends. Many parolees underestimate how closely they're going to be watched. So, what you see here on this chart, if you notice that there is a sharp drop in parolees after 2008, um, a parallel drop as you can kind of see in parolee exits. So this reflects some major policy changes. Tougher sentencing, reduced good time credit, abolishment of discretionary parole in some states, and probably longer minimum terms for violent offenses. So, and from Pontiac, this translated to more long-term inmates, more aging inmates, and fewer chances for early release. When parole slows down, prison populations balloon, and so do tensions. So there are two core parole types: discretionary parole. That's when the board decides if an inmate is ready. They review crime severity, risk level, uh, disciplinary record, program completion, mental health status, gang affiliation, the input from the victim, and a release plan. I watched many men rehearse for parole hearings like they were preparing for a job interview, but if their prison record wasn't full of tickets, the board didn't even blink. It's straight up denial. And then you have mandatory parole. This automatic release is based on statute and good time earned. There's no parole decision required. But the problem here is some inmates will game the system. They behave just well enough to earn mandatory parole, but they aren't truly rehabilitated. And these are the individuals that really struggle on the outside the most. So the other types of release, parole is not the only way out. Expiration of their term, their sentence, they walk out fully free, no supervision. Commutation of sentence, this is an executive reduction of the sentence. And then you have court orders. Often this is tied to overcrowding or legal issues. You have pardons. These, while often rare, generally pardons are politically motivated, tied to generally president or the governor. And then you have escape. Thankfully, extremely rare, but it does happen. And expiration cases kind of worried us, and they should. Say a man with a mental illness or violent tendencies would just walk out with no supervision, no medication plan, and no support. It's a public safety disaster just waiting to happen. So the parole board is one of the most it's one of the another one of the most misunderstood institutions in CJ. Their responsibilities really include determining readiness for release, setting conditions, monitoring parole, deciding when the parole ends, and revoking parole when they violate them. And in hearings, they really look for the honesty, they look for remorse, they look for accountability and maturity and stable reentry plans. And so, and they really look for progress in prison programs. So parole boards are not often easily fooled. They've seen every manipulation tactic in the book. So parole boards, they operate under two models. They operate under the autonomous model, which is independent of the corrections department, and they operate from the consolidated model, which is part of the correctional agency. This boards vary widely. Generally, there's 3 to 19 members. They're either full or part-time, and generally they're appointed or elected. Their authority is really based on risk to the community. What I've seen is inmates that used to ask me, hey, ACO, what do I need to tell the parole board? My answer to them, tell the truth and have the behavior to back it up. Boards don't grant parole based on words. They grant parole based on patterns and actions. So some guidelines. They're actually really good tools. They're precision instruments. The the salient factor score evaluates certain things like number of convictions, previous commitments, um, age at the offense, um, drug dependency, and crime-free intervals. So think of this kind of as a matrix. It doesn't tell the board what to decide, but it really frames the risk. The shift towards data-driven decisions was meant to eliminate bias. However, critics say that these tools sometimes really reinforce disparities. So parole hearings. Parole hearings are high stakes events. And the process includes reviewing institutional files, reading disciplinary reports, evaluating program completion, interviewing the inmate, hearing victim or family statements, and assessing release plans. Some states allow attorneys, some do not. Some allow witnesses, some do not. And then you have racial disparities. Research is really mixed on this. Some studies show that minority inmates are denied more often. Others show no significant difference when controlling for offense type or disciplinary history. And what I've observed, behavior spoke louder than race. If a man had 15 tickets in a year, no parole board in the country is letting him out. So standard parole conditions, they're strict, but parolees must adhere to these conditions. Report within 24 hours of release. Avoid weapons. Notify their parole officer of any changes, and really have to stay within travel boundaries. Even something small like moving in with family without notifying their parole officer, it's a violation. We kind of drilled this in inmates when we knew they were paroling. Parole is essentially parole's a second sentence, just it's just served outside the walls. So standard parole conditions, these include following all parole agent instructions, maintaining work, maintaining school, avoiding criminal associates, and submitting to warrantless searches. That's a thing. They can do that. Many parolees struggle because the transition from total structure to sudden independence sometimes can be very overwhelming. Inside, every decision is made for them. Outside, every decision is theirs. And sometimes they just make their own ones. So special conditions are just tailored to risk and needs. For example, a sex offender they have to attend specialized treatments. A drug offender, they undergo random drug testing. Someone with mental illness, they have to meet with mental health professionals. Someone convicted of fraud, they have to face financial restrictions. These conditions target the root causes of their crime, whether they're applied properly. When they're applied properly, they really do reduce recidivism. So more special conditions of parole include advising employers of criminal history, staying out of certain countries, be a flight risk, restricting bank accounts or credit for those that committed fraud. Some parolees feel that these conditions just set them up to fail. Others find it really gives them structure. The most successful parolees they were those who embraced the conditions instead of fighting them, because fighting them is just an uphill battle, and they're going to lose, and they're going to end up coming back. So parole officers have dual roles. Surveillance, they can search without warrants. They conduct visits on their homes. They monitor curfews. They test for drugs. They they enforce these conditions. Whereas a social worker, they do the counseling, they do referrals, they do crisis intervention, and then they also give employment assistance. Uh, this conflict really makes the job extremely hard. Officers must both be firm officers, but also compassionate helpers. So parole officers can really change the trajectory of the parolee's life. And a bad one can just ruin it. So supervision of parolees. So 5 states, including my former one, California, Texas, Illinois, New York, Pennsylvania, they supervise nearly half of the nation's parolees. If you look, these states are the ones with the largest cities. It's just simple math. But supervision strategies, they now really include the GPS monitoring, electronic curfew alerts, smartphone check-ins, and automated risk scoring. High risk parolees go to intensive supervision parole, which is ISP, and they're getting multiple contacts per week. They have mandatory programs. They have strict curfews. We always try to remind inmates, you won't be free. You will be monitored. So if we look at a case here, Swarthout versus Cook and Kate versus Clay. There is no constitutional right to be granted parole. You only have the right to a hearing, a chance to speak, and a written explanation. If those steps are not met, the courts, if those steps are met, the courts won't intervene. This decision gives parole boards tremendous discretion. So parole revocation. Violations come in two forms. Technical violations, which comes from missing appointments, positive drug screens, skipping curfew, contacting a victim, and refusing treatment. These are the most common. Then you have new crimes. These lead to immediate arrest and revocation. Morrissey versus Burr established due process. So they still have preliminary hearing, full revocation hearing, right to present evidence, and written decision. I've seen parolees come back to Pontiac over something as small as a missing check-in because it signaled that pattern of instability. So parole success and failure. 2/3 of parolees are rearrested within 3 years. That's kind of staggering, actually. So why? Returning to crime-heavy social networks, lack of stable housing, substance abuse, mental health struggles, poor coping skills, and limited job prospects. Many parolees simply just return to the same environment that led them to the crime. That's not very beneficial. It changes nothing in their world. Nothing changes in their behavior. So they come on back. So why do people fail on parole? Some of these other factors include strained marriages, damaged family relationships, unrealistic expectations, trauma from incarceration, lack of supportive mentors. Some states now have programs that support both inmates and their families to kind of rebuild those relationships. When support systems are strong, parole outcomes improve dramatically. So parole programs. These programs help parolees transition, seeking safety, trauma and substance use treatment, amenity therapeutic community. This is kind of a structured reentry. Boston Reentry Initiative. This is membership plus accountability, and then changing course. cognitive, behavioral reentry model, basically. And programs that these programs combine therapy, accountability, job preparation, and social support. All have the strongest outcomes. So other programs include motivational interviewing for substance abuse, adult sex offender treatment, of course CBT for that criminal thinking, federal release preparation programs, and the Minnesota Second Chance Ranch. The most successful parolees that I knew were the ones who embraced these programs, not because they were forced, but because they really recognized the value. We'll just skip that. So losing rights. After release, many parolees face immediate barriers. The big one is employment discrimination, you know, and a stigma. They have housing restrictions. They have occupational license denials, and many of them who didn't take advantage of the programs inside the facility they're in. They have educational limits. Some of them never even set foot in a classroom after eighth grade. So if they would have taken advantage of those educational programs that almost all facilities give, that would have given them a step up. But the employment discrimination is hard. That's probably the number one. So disenfranchisement. So this includes loss of voting rights, loss of parental rights, inability to hold certain jobs, and exclusions from some professions. These penalties vary by state, and they often outlast the parole period. So what can be done to improve parole effectiveness? So 6 domains impact reentry success. So personal conditions, personal health, counseling access, employment support, the social network environment, positive social networks, and accommodation, which is just a stable housing, and the criminal justice system itself, which is the quality of their supervision. If one of these collapses, the whole reentry structure just collapses with it. So recommended improvements include this neighborhood parole-based kind of supervision, reentry courts that support and actually add sanctions, and then partnerships with employers. I should say employers. But that that partnership with employers is really hard. Uh, there, some of the bigger cities, they do have initiatives such as this, to um, where the state will kind of partner with specific employers to try to kind of get those parolees started, just get their foot in the door with working, and once they maintain a really good work ethic, then they can kind of move out and get a big people job, so to speak. So what can be done to improve parole effectiveness? So Beard emphasizes that this front-loading supervision, the first 30 days are the most dangerous. About 10% are arrested within the first month. High supervision early on really stabilizes the parolee before old habits can return. And then you have the Second Chance Act. So this was signed into law on April 9th, 2008. So the Second Chance Act, it funds employment training. It funds substance abuse treatment, transitional housing, family support, mentoring programs, violence prevention, and reentry research. This act has funded countless of programs that started inside prisons, including mine, and they continued way after release. Okay, so in closing, um, parole reflects a simple truth: reentry is not an event; it is a long, fragile, difficult process. Success requires structured supervision, targeted programs, real accountability, strong support systems, meaningful opportunities, and a personal commitment. The difference between a successful parolee and a failed one often comes down to one thing: whether someone has the skills and support needed to resist the familiar pathways that brought them to prison in the first place. So thank you again for joining me into this in-depth look into Chapter 10. I will see you in the next one.